Hello all, welcome to the final video in the series on how modern men are made weak and how to build spiritual character. Today we're going to speak about your external life, and I think this is something we see a lot of in modernity, and that's men working jobs they hate or at least tolerate. I remember my own time in London working for media companies, and one thing which really drove me mad was corporate values. I do not care about corporate values, and they're all BS anyway to sell to salespeople. My job was to try and make rich people richer, as it is for most of us. And I felt a great lack of meaning in my job. Now, I don't want to be too rose-tinted here and think, well, all of us can go and do the dream job. That's not really realistic. However, what is realistic is for us to have a why we do something that we may not actually value. Now, in one sense, we could say, if we're in an ideal community, you might do the hard yards for your fellow brothers, for the maintenance of that people, be it, working hard on building a house or digging a well or whatever. I think we'd all put the yards in there, but we're not in that world. So we have to figure out what is your why. And if you start paying attention to this, you'll note that that question is really removed from our lives in this day and age. Maybe 1-2% of people live out a why when it comes to their career. But most people just, it's what you do. You're born, you go to school, you go to university, you get a job, you get married, you have kids. And for some people, they can almost blank out their soul. But I think for many people, their soul starts to call to them. And they just feel a sense of meaninglessness that the Premier League and Love Island and pornography just can't fill. And we try and just consume more and more things from all different directions. And again, it can sustain us for a while. But ultimately, man needs a why. Big theme on this channel is you have a soul. You can't avoid that. And if you don't speak to that part of yourself, you'll get ill. It's a major reason why I believe so many men are unwell, depressed, anxious in this day and age. We like to say, it's just, chemical imbalances in the mind. Maybe. Or maybe it's you've never actually got in touch with your soul. You feel like your life doesn't have any meaning. You feel like you're not moving towards anything. When you wake up, you can't hear the beauty in the bird song because you don't hear God's voice coursing through that, calling you home. These things are real. But in modernity, we don't tend to think about them so much and instead get lost into a noisy world of temptation and pleasure. So we have to think, what is the why that allows us to bear the role? I think it was Nietzsche who said, "He who has a why can bear any how." And it's a nice saying. Of course, what he's referring to there is we can do those hard yards if we're serving something bigger. So what is it that you can actually serve? Well, there are many things in this life. It could be a family, the next generation. It might be your tradition. It might be a religion. It might be your community. It might be your own spiritual journey. But there has to be something that outside of the hard yards you put in, you're actually getting back. Maybe it's a long-term aim to be free from the system. Whatever it is, you desperately need to have that. Otherwise, you're going to get eaten alive. And not only will you get eaten alive, your soul gets diminished. The light starts to fade. And what you truly are is never really born in this life, which is a tragedy. Now, one simple way, I think, of starting to come to terms with who and what you really are is to get back to nature. So many of us work jobs in this day and age which are unnatural. We're in front of screens all day, giving an artificial glare, usually in offices with those artificial lights. I remember when I was in the office once and the lights went out. It was like a power cut or something. And all that was left was the sun coming in through the windows. And it was it was sort of semi-dark in there, but I thought, this is bliss. This is bliss. I wish we could work in this atmosphere all the time. Everybody calmed down because it was a bit darker. You didn't have that horrible glare like you'd on some hospital table. And instead it was just the natural light coming through. Now, I thought that would be ideal, but of course, you don't want that in the modern era. No, it needs to be lights on, noisy, Now, I thought that's hellish for your system. It knocks you all out of sync. So we have to think, what is sync? And again, we don't want to be too romantic here because I get it. You're going to have to do the hard yards. You're going to have to be out of sync, but at least know when you're out of sync. Well, a good thing is to start watching the rhythms of nature. You already are aware of, the sun goes up and the moon comes up and so on. There are rhythms around us in the universe, timings, and the body reacts to these things. I personally believe when we have a full moon, people often feel a bit more mad, a bit more ecstatic, a bit more depressed, a bit more wild. And I believe that's because the power of the moon lights up the night sky and it's telling our brain that things aren't dead in the night anymore. Everything's come alive still. You just notice that one in your own life. See if you dream a bit more vividly when it's a full moon. But what I'm saying here is that, these things are much older than we are. We think it's wacky, but the universe is very, very old, and we're very, very young comparatively. And it's a real skill for us to learn to listen to nature, to listen to the universe, to realize we're part of it. One of the things that really helps me is just simply getting out into nature and listening to the wind in the trees. Now, the reason I do that isn't because I have some magic mystical connection, but because it slows me down. And one thing I've realized in my own life is God is steady. If you ever think about a spiritual master you've come across, or a spiritual figure you respect from your religion or practice, they very, very rarely speak fast. And they very rarely, like machine gun talk, throwing it all at you. They're steady, because they're in the breath of God, if you will. And this is something to be mindful of. It's a good practice every morning. I try and do it every morning with a bit of still time, meditation, prayer, or reading, just going out in nature, even sometimes just opening the window and listening to the birds and breathing in the fresh air. Because I want to slow down. Not because I can slow myself down, more because I realize God's presence. And God flows in a still, steady manner. The way I think about it is it's almost like a calm drum beat, and the bass is with the drum, the bass because it's that depth. But I'm like a jangly guitar all over the top when I'm not centered, and I'm making a mess of God's composition. So what I'm saying here is I'm really trying to slow down and integrate my own pace into God. Now, this isn't easy to do. I'm often in and out of it. I think most people are. As I would see it, that's the Christian journey in a way. Admitting we're out of sync with God, which I would view as sin. Not, you're going to hell because you touch your winky, but I'm just out of sync with God. That's all it is. When I'm out of sync with God, I can't see things clearly. I'm not going to be slow and steady. I'm going to be prey to wild emotions and maybe even the temptations of the world. So if I come back to God, I'm safe. I've got my spiritual armor on. And that's why we're trying to slow down and hear these rhythms. Now, if you do that and then you go to your workplace, just watch how quickly you'll be shifted out of that zone. It's amazing. And of course, modernity doesn't want you in that zone. The era we're in now is the era of the merchant. It's all about money and speed and advancement. Yeah, and again, that can create lots of things. I think Marx called it creative destruction, which is a nice phrase, although obviously I'm not a Marxist. But the point is, we have to recognize the era we're in, and that era will pass. But God, which is being, will not pass. He cannot pass. He's eternal. He's non-physical, the unmoved mover. And we're going into his wisdom, his guidance. Now, as we go back into the world, you'll start to see that you'll have a natural awareness, an intuition in your job. And maybe your job's bearable. Maybe there are parts in it where you think, yeah, do you know what? I'm earning enough money for my family, for my future aims. I can do it. There are bits of it in which I can enjoy. For instance, in my old job, I used to do lots of writing and editing and so on. And I like writing. I like editing. So I can enjoy that process. I love words, So there are things that I can actually cling on to that I thought, yeah, this is serving me. There's a natural expression here. If there isn't, it might be time to start thinking elsewhere. Of course, you don't want to rush that, but that can be a why for you again. So even if you're really suffering right now, that why can be, what is it that I'm called to do? You don't have to go and be, a superstar rock star. Your why could be being a teacher or being a carpenter. I mean, Jesus was a carpenter. There are a lot worse things you could do than be a carpenter. But it's finding where is your true voice and where can it be expressed. Again, it may not be perfect. And it may be that your true voice isn't expressed in your work, but your work serves as something to allow your true voice to be spoken in another arena. Again, that might be your family or your community or your tradition. And until we really find that great sense of meaning, we will be like batteries and we'll hate our lives. It's really, really hard for men to be in that. So I hope this helped, and I hope this gives you some pause for thought on the direction you take your life. Again, it's not about being a superstar with millions of pounds. If you're called in that direction, great. But for many of us, it's not. For me, it's not, and that's all right. But again, these are very key things in men's life. Please do join the Substack. I will be holding a free call on the 7 steps soon. I just want to build up a lot of numbers before I do it. I have to make it worthwhile for me. And do subscribe to the Substack, become a member. You can join in the monthly calls there as well as get exclusive content. Other than that, thanks for watching this mini-series. I'll go back to some generic content soon on the issues of the day as well as spiritual content. Apart from that, God bless, enjoy the rest of your day, and take care.